Hello and welcome to today's Cybersecurity Summit Power Hour. My name is Rick. I'll be in the background answering any WebEx technical questions. We have a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties joining the WebEx session, please submit a question using the Q&A panel. During the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode. And as a reminder, this event is being recorded for rebroadcast. We'll be holding a Q&A session at the conclusion of each of today's presentations. We encourage you to submit written questions at any time during the presentation using the Q&A panel at the bottom right of your screen. Please type your questions into the text field and hit send. Please keep the dropdown as all panelists. With that, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Bradford Rand, CEO of the Cybersecurity Summit. Bradford, you have the floor.
Okay. All right. Thank you very, very much for joining us. We are excited to have great speakers today from the U.S. Secret Service, IBM, Duo Security, and of course the Department of Homeland Security's CISA division. We're going to talk about a lot of things today, the current events, best practices, current threats, and we are going to have, as I said, a tremendous amount of information. We are going to be sharing this also on Cyber Summit USA in approximately 2 days. We are going to be sharing most of the slides. And for those of us, for those of you that is, who are going to be joining us for the entire session, you'll be getting a CPE credit also in approximately 2 to 3 days. And without further ado, we're going to bring on Alan Davis, from the U.S. Secret Service. He's been with the service for over 20 years and has spoken at, I think, a half a dozen live cybersecurity summits at our Atlanta show. And hopefully in 2021, we'll be coming back to all of the cities that we are going to be in. And we are going to be kicking off our first virtual cybersecurity summit on the 28th of July for the Florida region. So certainly tune into that. And without further hesitation, let's bring on Alan Davis. Alan, can you hear us?
I can. Thanks, Bradford.
You got it. Have it back.
So I'll go ahead and give you a video because it was suggested that it might be this might be recorded or might be a previous recording that's not live. So I'll take that, make sure everybody's aware it's not, and then I'm going to close the video because I don't necessarily have a face for TV. And then we'll go into the presentation. I started with the Secret Service in '99, and one of the recurring, and I was a criminal investigator for many years, and ultimately a lot of the forensics that I started doing in 2013, when I do forensics, and that's what I currently do now as I manage our forensics lab in Atlanta, is I go back to the criminal investigative roots, and usually with their smoke, I like to look at the overlapping circles of probability, possibility, and untested impossibility. And the reason I say it that way is because a lot of times when you go into businesses or you go into potential victims and you start looking at their systems from an objective standpoint, you immediately identify stuff that they were unwilling to see simply because they immediately said it was impossible, but yet it was untested, so they never tried it. So we'll go through a couple different options or a couple different topics, especially related to the COVID and some of the existing and changing platforms that everybody's dealing with in their business environments at the moment. And we'll talk about disaster, cyber response, some business continuity plans. And I think the biggest thing that we always resolve back to is you can't really understand abnormal and you can't really understand when there's a problem if you don't know what should be normal and what's whatever your normal operational footprint, you have to understand that before you can really start to identify the issues. We'll talk about convenience versus security and the speed of business versus the speed of secure operations. Unfortunately, a lot of times what happens is there's such a push to get the bottom line done that a lot of the security protocols are kind of skipped. And this becomes a huge issue. The other thing that I would touch on is the third party and insider threat issues. The lack of complicity doesn't necessarily remove the vulnerability. And we'll talk about a couple different examples, but bottom line is you're going to have individuals that may become insider threats, even though they may love the company they work with and they may be great employees. unfortunately, they may not have good practices that cause a vulnerability that ultimately creates an insider threat, even though they're not complicit. The current trends, because this is the question that we get all the time recurring, is what are the current trends for cyber fraud, cyber crime, different types of potential problems. And it's really not necessarily new. You're going to always have zero-day vulnerabilities. But bottom line is the business email compromise, the ransomware, and insert the crisis of the day. Currently, it's COVID-19. And then we'll talk about some general preparation or prevention. So business email compromise, the biggest thing that we see in the misunderstanding with the business email compromise is everything, the environment for which a fraudster works is typically in play long before the actual business email compromise overt act occurs. So that phishing email, that spear email, that attack that comes in, the malicious software, it may sit on a system for months before it actually is utilized. Additionally, once someone has a foothold into the network, they may view your operation for some time before they actually choose to act. And fitting enough, we're coming up on a holiday weekend, and typically the business email compromise will be coupled with some type of crisis, some type of immediate response, an action that has to occur right now. For instance, Thursday afternoon, right before a holiday weekend, everything has to get done, so on and so forth. And then you're pushed into making a decision that's really not necessarily the smartest or the most secure, and usually it's fraudulent. The biggest thing that I want to drive home is we have to, either the Secret Service or the FBI has to have this information about a potential successful errant wire transfer or business email compromise within 24 to 48 hours, because if we don't have that information, we're not able to stop it, we're not able to undo it. And then everybody should know this, but what we're continually seeing, email is not a secure form of operation, it's not a secure form of business transaction, but we consistently see emails occurring where large amounts of money are being transferred just off of that email. Layer your approach. Create a minimal multi-factor, use keys for encryption, private, public, or even use a low-tech out-of-band technique where maybe you text your client, a phrase or a number or whatever, just to verify the information that you're getting is accurate and it is legitimate. The ransomware a lot of times goes in with the BEC. We'll see coupled attacks where ends up having, maybe you get hit with a BEC, and then as they leave the environment, they burn it down with a ransomware attack. So it doesn't necessarily, they aren't necessarily siloed by themselves. And ultimately, a lot of the same infrastructure and a lot of the same rollout techniques are utilized by the attackers. Ultimately, what we're consistently seeing is third-party service providers and the remote access with either a hybrid system where somebody's using their own device or their own network create vulnerabilities. The newest attacks we're seeing, they'll have a data exfil component that goes ahead and pushes out information prior to the encryption, and then anything that doesn't is not encrypted or anything that may give some type of insight into what happened is being deleted. So logs, unaffected systems, and so forth, all being wiped. And then bottom line is you need to make a business decision. As a federal law enforcement officer, I'm going to tell you don't pay. But that may not be the right choice for you as a business, and you need to understand that if you decide to pay, you're going to have a Bitcoin wallet. Are you going to contract a negotiator? Again, the textbook answer is don't pay, and the biggest reason for this is because you're going to encourage advanced persistence, because most likely they've already created a backdoor. They've already created some other type of way to get them back into your system. Or you may mark yourself as an increased target for later on subsequent attacks. And then the biggest comment we get all the time is restore backups, which is a good concept, and you absolutely should be able to do that. But if you haven't tested that, you haven't implemented it, if your backups are 3 months old, that may not necessarily be a realistic goal. And it certainly may not be something that you can do within a timely amount of time. So everybody for the last 6 months, maybe 4 months, definitely has been dealing with the COVID-19. And obviously it creates more anxiety. We have a lot of concerns, a lot of uncertainty related to business as well as operations. But ultimately, what it has done is it's created a remote workforce and a lot of new environments that we're not used to. If you previously did not have a standard of what you could expect and what you knew to be the case, you're certainly not going to have that insight now when you're in a completely different environment. So understanding what's known, understanding the potential vulnerabilities, and then where your weakest links are very important. You can't really understand problems unless you understand the normal operation, what should be happening, and when there's a problem. The biggest issue we continually see with this is a lack of insight on employee activity, especially net flow, logins, and then having unfettered access once they get their account and log in. Again, with new contract potentials, new opportunities comes fraud, and we're continually seeing this. There's a lot of time-sensitive information related to all of these different either testing or supplies or contracts and so forth. And the fraudsters continually use this. This is a whack-a-mole. At the end of the day, COVID will get replaced with a new thing. And it just comes back to ultimately knowing what your business continuity plan is, knowing what normal is, and then knowing how to mitigate and react to that once something is amiss. The infrastructure, VPN obviously is the way to go, where you're going to have a very good connection for remote workers to control, and more than anything, make sure someone's not eavesdropping and taking that information from the workers. But understand the concept of if someone steals that employee's credential and is able to do the same VPN tunnel, they can sometimes leverage that. Attackers can sometimes leverage that and use that against you. So ultimately, not having the insight for a third party into your employee's activity may work against you if you don't have the insight from a stolen employee's credential in your same environment. So understanding that's key. And again, I'll give you a perfect example. It's a very rough example, but bottom line is, if you have an employee that smokes and they walk outside at 10 a.m. or so to a smoke break, and they prop the door open, and a gunman comes in and starts shooting up your business, your employees and so forth, it's a graphic example of a non-complicit insider threat. That person that was going to smoke cigarettes certainly did not want that to happen to your company and your employees, their fellow coworkers, but at the end of the day, they're an insider threat. The same thing can happen for an infrastructure or an employee if you're able to leverage an account that's not necessarily monitored, and you don't have good control over what activity that employee credential gets into your network and beyond. You're really allowing for an insider threat to occur, even if that employee is not a complicit part of that insider threat. The biggest thing is the multi-factor authentication. One of the biggest questions, concerns we get often is not having the infrastructure to set that up, or not having the funds to set that up. There are very different ways you can do that. You can potentially get a multi-factor key with the USB. You could even get something as simple as having just an IP address associated and time frame associated with when an employee should be working versus when that stolen credential is being logged in from Eastern European area. So continuous training is what we always talk about. And the bottom line is, you're going to have a lot of employees that are resistant to the training, but they need to understand that their role in the company is very important for security. Typically, when we roll out on engagements, we'll start talking to first-line employees, and they'll often know what a concern is before we even start telling them why we're there. That's important, because if you empower your employees to actually voice concerns of stuff they're seeing in the network, whether it be either anomalous net flow activity or credentials, or even something as simple as their desktop icons moving around when they go home. The other thing is, manage your risk when you can. If you don't need to have an active connection all the time, if you don't need to have a remote desktop protocol set up all the time, then get rid of that. That's just one other vulnerability that's existent for your company to be hit with ransomware, or with some type of phishing campaign or credential stealing program that's going to take user logins. Empower the employees to raise concern and stop an operation without fear of reprisal. We see this all the time on business email compromises because ultimately the employee is concerned about it, but they're also concerned that the CEO or the CFO is going to have a real concern if they don't allow the transaction to go through. So empower your employees to make those conversations, have those concerns, raise those questions. And then ultimately, have protocols in place. If you have a 7-layer protocol, but that can be thwarted by a CFO making a phone call and saying, hey, I don't care, I want you to push this through on Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. Well, understand the ramification of that is someone steals that credential, that person or a fraudster could pretend to be that CFO and push through that same transaction and it ends up being fraudulent. So I've provided some resources for Southeast, for the Secret Service, as well as DHS, Cyber, and CERT, and CISA. You may get some other of this from other speakers today. But then ultimately, wanted to open it up for any questions, any comments, or any discussion.
All right, Alan, thank you so much for that. We're going to go into the Q&A panel right now. First question I'm getting a lot of is, will the slides be available after? So are we able to share these slides on our website?
Yeah, these are pretty open source information that you can see other places. We try to stay away from the whack-a-mole concepts of 0 days and other stuff that's immediate and look at more conceptually at larger concerns, but yes, they're going to be available.
Okay, and I'm taking a question from the audience here. Is it true that the victim can be prosecuted if the ransom money funds a terrorist organization? Interesting one.
I think a lot of that comes back to complicity and whether or not the victim should have known. One of a slightly different version of that would be if they're a knowing mule and they realize or should realize that what's going on with the money. The perfect example of that is if you're staying at home and you're putting checks in your account and you're getting 10%, $20,000 to $30,000 just for a check to land in your account and then wire that money overseas. Well, maybe at some point you need to realize, hey, this is probably not a legal practice that I'm partaking in, and ultimately maybe part of a bigger scheme. But ultimately, we don't typically go after mules for BECs. That being said, if we have a behavior where an individual has consistently shown that they knew and they continue the operation, then it has happened.
All right. And so our final question, is there an increase or decrease of cyber attacks during COVID-19? I'm going to assume that one's a...
I think definitely there's been a huge increase. And a lot of that comes back to what I always say. If you don't know the known, then you're not going to know the unknown. Well, now the known is not even really known because it's everything's changed, right? So the environment's completely changed. Well, now you add on top of that the sense of urgency for a lot of these timely transactions and so forth. And now you have some potential contracts, other products that are needed that weren't previously needed before January and so forth. So there's a ripe environment for fraud to occur, not only from extra money, but also from just the environment with COVID.
Great. I've got one more question I'm going to throw at you. What does the Secret Service recommend if a ransomware attacker threatens to release exfiltrated data?
So what some companies have done, and I'll tell you what's happened versus what we would recommend, right? So what some companies have done is there are attorneys and other individuals now, security professionals, that essentially will negotiate on your behalf. It's kind of very similar to a pen tester that might hack into your network and then come and show you how you have problems. But that being said, beyond the ethical issues of that, we would say that if you can harden up your network and keep that from happening, that's a better solution. And then I would come back to don't devalue the data that you have, because typically what we have is companies are really undervalue their data. If it's something that shouldn't get out, then you need to make sure that data is protected at rest, in transit, and so forth. and do various levels of encryption, two-factor authentication or more, to make sure that someone's not able to get into your network and steal the data. That being said, it's a business decision, and if you decide that that data is so important, a lot of companies will decide to go ahead and pay to try to get that information back. We're seeing a lot of ransomware as a service, so it doesn't always happen where you get the information back. The files aren't successfully decrypted, and sometimes it doesn't work as you expect. Just think, you're making a deal with a criminal, so it may not work out in the end.
All right, well, thank you so much. We look like we ended right on time. It's 10:50, so again, thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again, Alan, at one of our next events. We're going to roll right into our next speaker. We have Dave Lewis. He's Advisory CISO with Duo Security. Dave, how are you?
Good, and yourself?
Hi, how are you?
No, fantastic, fantastic.
All right, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I will be turning my camera off just to save bandwidth, but I just wanted to say hi to everyone before I get rolling. All right, so my name is Dave Lewis, and I am with Cisco Systems. I'm in the Duo Security Business Unit, and I am the Global Advisory CISO for that part of the organization. So let's just remember how to do the click. There we go. I have been doing security in one form or another now for the better part of about 25 plus years now, and it has been an absolutely fantastic journey. And the one really interesting thing that I've taken away from this is learning from all the mistakes I've made along the way. Now, I've done everything from being a firewall admin right through to being a CISO for an energy company, so I've seen all sorts of different types of attacks, different types of attempts. And, to go back to our last speaker, yes, multi-factor authentication, besides the fact that I work for a company that produces it, is a very, very good idea because it helps limit the chances of an attacker breaching your systems. I identify as a hacker, and in my world, that's a good thing. Unfortunately, the world doesn't always seem it that way. The hackers must die, they must be stopped, all hackers must die. So, when you do a quick search on the internet, it can be somewhat disheartening. So I have to come clean. I am a Canadian, and we have our Canada Day tomorrow, and I wish a happy July 4th to all of my American cousins coming up. And as part of the Duo Security Business Unit, we are a small little startup that was really bent on democratizing security. And what I mean by that is making it as easy as possible for people to safely and securely do their jobs, but making sure that it's easy for them to use. And now we are part of Cisco for about a year and a half now, and it's been a really fun ride. And as you can see, the one vendory thing I'll do is say, we are available on the Cisco website. The one thing we did miss right out of the gate was the opportunity on branding, and that was to take Duo and Cisco and put them together and make Disco, and full props to my boss, Wendy Nather, for that one. We really did kind of miss the boat on that, but, I'll keep rooting for it. So our mission is really simple. Our mission is to protect your mission, and it's all about talking about zero trust. Now, zero trust, unfortunately, has been given a bit of a buzzwordy status since it was coined back in 2010, but there is real meat behind it. It's all about talking about when things change and where they change. You want to assume all networks are hostile. You've got to be continuously verifying. The idea here is the perimeter is not what we used to see it as. It is anywhere an access decision is being made. And I'll hammer on that a few times as we go through. If I went around the room and I asked everyone here, what is love? I guarantee you I'll get a different answer from every single person. And unfortunately, that has happened with zero trust, where everyone seems to have their own iteration as to what it might be. The easiest way I like to put it to people is say, it's on fire. And this is a really oversimplification, but the idea here is trust nothing until you verify that it is supposed to be there, be it a person, an application, or a device. Because you know that mistakes are going to happen. We've all been there at one point in time where everything was working fine in development environment, promoted into production, and everything went kaboom. And then you ended up being on this poor guy running through and having his hands over his head, because this is the default behavior for any security professional. Zero trust was first coined by the Jericho Forum back in around 2003, 2004. It's kind of hard for me to find the exact paper that was about deperimeterization, but that was really the forefront of that. I have been told that there was a talk roughly about the same topic at the first DEF CON. I have yet to track down that particular piece of material, so if anybody has that, feel free to drop me a line at the end of this. It was coined, Zero Trust that is, was coined by John Kinderfog back in 2010, and this has been really good in one regard. It got people to pay attention. When I talk about zero trust, I'm talking about reducing risk in the environment. And it is simple as that. It is really about making sure that you're using the tools that, by and large, you already have in your possession now. You have the ability to do network zone segmentation. You have the ability to rationalize the users in your environment, and so on. But you got to make sure that you don't go, okay, this is going to be something we can do in a year or a month or a day. Zero trust is an iterative process that doesn't stop. When Google rolled out their version of it called BeyondCorp, it took them roughly about 8 years, and they're still continuing on with that. So don't lose heart if you head down this path, and I do recommend it as a way of reducing risk in your environment. There's also a book from O'Reilly on Zero Trust Networks. I don't know the authors, nor do I have any stake in it, but it is an excellent resource if you want to read more. And that's just it. The landscape is changing. We have our applications in the cloud. We have mobile devices, especially these days with the pandemic. People are working from anywhere. I've had the benefit of being a remote employee for about 15 years, but for a lot of people, this is new, and we have to be very cognizant of that outside of the occasional Friday working from home, this is new. And we as security professionals have to make sure we are there to help enable them and guide them through this, because this is a new experience for all of them, well, the vast majority of them. Zero Trust is about enabling multi-cloud access, enabling BYOD. So if you don't have enough assets to give your staff to work from home and they're able to use their home computers, then you have the infrastructure in place in order to accomplish this. Sorry. It's all about reducing breaches, because this is really at the heart of it. And as we've seen over time, if I go back to, about 2008, we saw data breaches start to climb. And as we track them over time, now they are really through the roof. We have to get rid of the idea of the traditional perimeter approach and look at it from zero trust, which is making sure you are checking the access anywhere it happens. That is your new perimeter. And we all love our triad, so it's really simple as this. Users, apps, and devices. You want to look at it from this perspective, that you are securing all of these. This is the easiest way to get into it. And I always like to refer to multi-factor authentication as the gateway drug in order to get you started. And I mean that in very much a nice way. There are 5 really easy steps to go through in order to get to that. And when I say easy in conceptually they're easy, there's a lot of heavy lifting that has to happen. You want to confirm the user identities in your environment. You want to gain access, visibility into what they are doing and how their devices are operating. You want to ensure device security and making sure that those devices are operating the way they are supposed to and that they're not doing anything anomalous. You want to enforce contextual access policies in that, the people from HR are not doing work on your mainframe after hours when there is no reason on this earth that they would ever be doing that. And then step 5, you want to make sure that you're securing access to all of your applications, because you don't want Dave sitting at a Tim Hortons in Toronto accessing your SAP or your email systems when I don't work for you. These are the kind of things you have to take into account. How are you marshaling that access, especially in today's remote landscape? One of the best things that I learned in my career was back in school. I actually started out with a degree in classical studies and archaeology. And it was really amazing to be able to actually say that I can apply this to today's way of thinking. The number one lesson I learned is castles simply don't scale, and we have to change our thinking. And we used to, always go on the idea, it's okay, we have a firewall, everything is fine on the inside, but that really has been demonstrably proven as false. Another thing, too, is we all like to be environmentally friendly, and we like to do recycling, but please don't recycle your usernames and passwords. And when I say that, predominantly the passwords, because unfortunately, when an attacker breaches a system, one of the first things they do is take those sets of credentials and reuses them against other sites in an attempt to either escalate their privilege or gain access to resources that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. So if you're using the same email same password for your email as you're using for your internet banking, this could present a problem, and the attackers know that, and they'll capitalize on that. And it's really simple because passwords are very simplistic. You could stand there outside the gates of the castle and say, I have the password, and they'll say, well, no, that's not the right password, go away. But at no point do they confirm who you are. You have just happened to have found my house keys on this side of this road, and it has my address on it, and you know where it is. But realistically, that doesn't mean that's me. And that's one of the things we have to make sure is we have to do a better job on authentication. Now, when I talk about castles not scaling, a great example from history was in 410 AD, when when the Visigoths sacked Rome, Yeah, I guess you didn't see that coming. But the reality here is what they did was they surrounded the city and waited until the city ran out of resources. So they showed that a perimeter-based model, like we're used to with a lot of our network architectures, was demonstrably proven broken in 410 AD, and we have to do a better job of our security. And in Canada, we like to make a joke about, when you're out hiking, you just have to be faster than the hiker behind you in case a bear comes along. But the problem is when you apply that to, a computer security model, the reality is there are more than enough bears to go around. It's all about reducing the risk. And zero trust, buzzword or not, is something that is tangible that you can use to help reduce the risk. From doing, authenticating the devices, authenticating the users, making sure that they are the people that are supposed to be able to access the network, as opposed to somebody that just happens to have the password. We have to, as security professionals, make sure that we are doing a far better job of advocating for the organization, there to help enable the staff to do their job securely. I used to work with a guy that I referred to quite literally as the flaming sword of justice. These days, thanks to Game of Thrones, there's plenty of images that can help nail that home. But his entire mantra was, how do we get to know? How do we get this person fired for, surfing eBay? These are the kind of things that made no sense to me, and now they've proven out to be completely broken. But as we go forward, we might have to make sure we're enabling the users properly, because data breaches are and going to continue to happen. And unfortunately, they happen far too often. Like with S3 buckets on Amazon's AWS. People will spin them up, but they will ignore the banner in great big large print across the front of the screen saying, do not make this publicly available. And then next thing you know, they're going, oh, we were attacked and breached by a sophisticated attacker. When we look at stuff like the Verizon DBIR and reports like this, we find that data breaches really aren't that sophisticated these days, because a lot of times it's weak credentials or compromised devices, things that were avoidable. And we have to realize that our physical perimeter is porous. When we talk about VPN, yes, that is a great way to make sure that you're securing access to your environment, but you also have to realize there's more to it than that. If somebody has compromised your device and has your password, we want to make sure that that is the right person that's getting in and not somebody that just happens to have the information. We have to mature our version as to what the perimeter is. And that's just it. We have to move beyond what we're used to looking at it as. My boss, Wendy Nather, has said this, and I've said this a couple times already in this talk, is that perimeter is anywhere an access decision is being made. This may seem overly simplistic, but that is the easiest way to approach it, so we can dispel the notion of it's okay, we have a firewall. The perimeter is everywhere. You have remote employees, you have third-party contractors, mobile devices, cloud apps, and so on. These are the things that you have to look at, because it really has spread how things are done getting into our network. A zero trust model is really simple when we go back to that triad we were talking about earlier. You want to make sure you're verifying the users. You want to make sure that the trusted devices are the ones that are gaining access to your network and not somebody that's using their Xbox at home. Not that I've ever done that more than once. You want to make sure that you have policies that are applied to secure your applications. Back in 2012, I started tracking data breaches because apparently I needed a hobby. And one of the interesting things was, if we look down the list here, in that year, it was LinkedIn with 6.5 million records, and that was considered to be a massive breach. Now we are talking in the order of magnitude of billions of records. And I know what it's like to go through a data breach because I've been through there. I've lived it myself. I had a group called Root Beer Sec that was good enough to compromise one of the websites of my company. And yeah, it really stung. But we have to really take a step back and understand, what is it we're doing wrong? Are we moving too quickly to get things done at the sake of our own security? Because if I look at 4 years ago on a site called informationisbeautiful.net, we see all sorts of data breaches. They do a wonderful job of data visualization of sites that were breached, among other things. But if we jump forward to a few more years and, oh, right, yeah, now it's so big now that all of the data breaches don't fit on the screen, to the point where they actually had to re-architect how the data was presented on their site just so it would fit. Why is this getting worse? A lot of it is relying on passwords or not relying on proper patch management. And then we have to look at what's open. What kind of ports are listening in America today? So this was just from recently. This varies from day to day, but this was 182 million ports were listening in the States at the time I took this snapshot. That's not a good or bad thing. That's just, the cost of doing business. But you have to understand, a subset of those will be vulnerable to different types of things. Case in point, systems that were vulnerable to Eternal Blue, there was 1,562 at the time. Heartbleed, over 18,000. Systems that were vulnerable to Bluekeep, almost 39,000 systems. And these are all systems that could have been remedied with a patch. Unfortunately, this presents an opportunity for an attacker to escalate privilege or gain access to resources that you really don't want them into. We have to look at Zero Trust in the frame of risk management or trusted access security, making sure that we have the value proposition of devaluing stolen credentials and making sure that low-hanging fruit is not readily available to the attacker. We want to complicate lateral movement. We don't want them to be able to breach a system that we weren't paying attention to and then have them escalate into our back-end systems, because that's what they want to do. That is what they are trained to do, and there is a monetary gain for them to have. We don't want to put money in their pocket. Bastion hosts are a thing. Back in 2003 or 2004, when we were talking about the deperimeterization paper from Jericho Forum, one of the things that I brought up was, we should do all laptops and desktops and servers as Bastion hosts and do away with the DMZ. I was almost run out of the building because the people that would have had to support this were in the room, and they did not like that idea at all. They wanted to have a firewall to take care of it for them, and unfortunately, the firewall is not a magic pixie dust that you sprinkle on the network. The DMZ to the Chewy Center. Well, we used to look at, and in a lot of cases still do, of hardening systems before we put them into the DMZ so that they are secure and resilient to attack. But we don't necessarily take the same level of care with systems on the internal network. And that is something that we have to do a better job of, because this just opens us up for more issues. One example is an organization I was working for where we had systems on the internal network that were purpose-built servers that unfortunately had entire copies of Microsoft Office installed on them for no other reason than we had the license, and the support team thought, why not? I just let it go from there. And yes, they were not patching those particular iterations of software. We got to set expectations when we're talking about Zero Trust. We want to make sure that we are not getting ahead of ourselves and saying, we'll have completely Zero Trust posture by X. It's an iterative process, and you have to look at it as a game of increments. The easiest way to get into it is looking at it from doing not easiest. The best way to get into it is looking at it, doing a rationalization of the usernames and passwords in your organization. Look at the systems and assets that are on your network or connecting to your network, and make sure that you know all of the applications that you're trying to secure. Once you have done that homework, then you can look at multi-factor authentication as the easy entry point to help reduce the risk to your organization. You got to determine the priorities in your organization as to what is it you're trying to do. Don't ever try to boil the ocean, because that ends badly. You want to make sure that you are looking at something like legitimate credentials. In most reports, when you read them, it's usually about 200 days before somebody notices that they've been breached. Just imagine if your credentials have been breached for 10 days and these user accounts were being used against your network. Well, how would you know that they had been stolen if they were legitimate accounts coming into your network? These are the kind of things that multi-factor authentication, as an example, would help to reduce the risk, along with biometrics or passwordless, and that is all for a longer conversation at another point. You want to verify your users, the devices, and every application that connects to your organization. It's really simple. You want to make sure that you know who's accessing what, and then controlling where they can go so that you can get business done. And yes, these slides will be available. You want to make sure you have trusted users. You want to make sure that you are avoiding stolen credentials being a thing. Usernames and passwords, if the attacker has it, they can breach your systems. You want to look at it from the idea of usernames, passwords, a second factor auth, be it multi-factor authentication, and trusted device. The device is one that you know that's supposed to attach to your network. And if it's not, if it's a BYOD device, it has a different policy that restricts it to only what you deem that is not a negative risk profile for your organization. You want to look at trusted devices as well. You want to look at these, make sure that they are the ones that are supposed to connect to your network, and make sure they're patched to the right level. For example, here's a prompt that somebody had not done their software update on their browser. These are the kind of things that you can help push to enable the user to be part of the solution so they too can do the patching. You want to make sure that BYOD devices, before they attach to whatever assets you're going to allow them to attach to, are patched to current or N-1 or whatever you deem as proper. Every application that you're using to do business, you want to make sure that you don't have this random Canadian at a Tim Hortons attaching to your network when he's not supposed to be there. You get granular on the policies and be able to do location, device, network, IP address, whatever it is that is germane to your risk profile in your organization. There's no one size fits all. You have to make sure that it is in line with the risk to your organization and that you are doing your best to execute your fiduciary responsibility to protect your organization. So a zero trust shopping list is really easy. Start with an asset inventory, user management, device management through a uniform policy. Defined repeatable processes are a great way to help reduce risk in your organization. Have you ever done ITIL? Painful as that might be, that will reduce risk in your organization. And then once you have all these pieces in place and you have multi-factor authentication rolled out, you want to make sure that you're looking at the user and entity behavior analytics to make sure how users are operating on your network as well as devices. And then a nice easy one is network zone segmentation. There's no reason you should be in an organization that has a flat network that spans the globe. The authentications must flow. We want to make sure that we're doing them properly. The attackers will come at you from any way they can. Here's an example of a submarine map that spans the globe. This is just one of the many, many layers where the attackers can focus their attentions. If they took out one of these links, it would be a major impact to the internet. This is just one example of many. Now, when we looked at the ports earlier, there was one particular example where we were looking at OpenSSH within those ports, and we understand that there's a subset that are vulnerable. And this particular one was vulnerable to all of these individual exploits. Or, sorry, they had all these vulnerabilities, my apologies. And that was how many of those ports were listening in the US. Yes, a subset of them was vulnerable, and this is not a fear, uncertainty, and doubt thing. This is literally factual. This is one that I found going through the logs. You want to make sure that you're encrypting all of your traffic, both at rest and in flight. There are better ways also to do security, and passwordless is the next new thing. Now, if you take nothing else away from this network other than this is a great thing to look up. This is WebAuthn, which, yes, I have the N capitalized by accident. My apologies. But this is something you want to look up with W3C. This is a open standard for doing passwordless authentication. This is something I highly recommend you have a look at. This was ratified about a year ago and something definitely worth checking out. Quick wrap up. Assume everything is hostile. Establish a trust engine. And right down to keep it simple. Asset inventory, get a solid hold on your user management, find out what's on your network, look at how things are working, define repeatable processes, and zone segmentation is huge. Because we as security professionals have to make sure that we are not doing the flaming sword of justice and running around saying the answer is no. We need that sword to dissolve. We need to be there to enable the business and make sure that we are not always throwing the holy hand grenade of Antioch every time something is amiss. I want to say thank you, everyone, to listening. I really do appreciate it. I know that your time is valuable. And thank you all for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email on Twitter or check out our website at duo.com. And thank you once again.
All right. Thank you, Dave. We still have nearly 400 people on right now watching. So submit your questions. We're going to go to the Q&A box right now to address a few of those. All right. How should I approach writing new IAM standards and policies during an M&A? What things should I look out for when doing so?
Okay. Well, honestly, you have to do as much homework as absolutely possible. And I have been through the M&A business in the past, quite a few years back, where I was with a company that was buying smaller organizations and trying to find out all of the hidden anthills. And eventually some will pop up that you didn't expect. So making sure that you are being diligent and going through and reviewing everything you can find and then question all of the answers. Eventually you will get there. There is no easy answer to that question. It just requires a lot of due diligence.
All right. Another one, zero trust isn't really zero, but establishing known trust relationships. How is this really any different than defining these relationships individually as done in the past?
Well, it isn't, and that's the beauty of it, because when you look at the rate of data breaches that have progressed over the last 10 years plus, obviously we're not doing what we should have been doing before. And this is where we have to go back and look at the core fundamentals, look at the things that we should have been doing all along. patch management, account management, network zone segmentation, all of these things that we've known about for 25, 30 years that unfortunately at some point we obviously have drifted away from because there's so many data breaches in evidence in the news today. So yeah, there isn't a whole lot different about it. It's just more about emphasizing what we should be doing correctly.
All right. All right, we're just about on time. Looks like we did a good job staying on track today. If anyone else has any further questions, they can feel free to still submit them in the Q&A, and Dave can answer them through the chat box. We're going to move on to our next speaker now. Thank you again, Dave, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you again soon. All right, next we have Michael Bunyard. He's the Program Director, Product Marketing and IAM Fraud with IBM Security. Michael, are you there?
I am. How you doing, Nancy?
Great, good. Thanks for joining us this morning. All right, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. You have the floor.
Awesome. So yeah, well, this should be an interesting presentation that kind of builds on and kind of doubles down on zero trust as a concept and how we can leverage identity, multi-factor authentication, and things like risk-based authentication to really leverage identity as a key pillar of zero trust. So, you know, as Dave said, the concept of zero trust has been around in various forms and fashion for years. And I think what's interesting is things like COVID and working from home have just exacerbated the need because, you know, we now have an environment where there's different types of users. They could be privileged users, they could be workforce, they could be consumers, they could be things, are trying to access resources across a hybrid multi-cloud environment. Those resources might be mainframe on-prem, they might be SaaS applications. And really, we can't trust people in this environment, whether they're inside the network or not. We have to have a zero trust approach towards them. And we need to be able to enforce informed policies in order to protect the data. We do need to, since we're not trusting anybody, we need to authenticate every action, and we need to do that on a continuous basis. So authentication isn't a one-time thing that happens when someone logs in to access a resource. It is something that we need to measure risk throughout an interaction on a continuous basis, and based on the level of risk, we need to step up and authenticate them either transparently or through an MFA in order to mitigate that risk. So I think some of these frameworks are very interesting. Gartner's Carta has a special emphasis on continuousness. And, you know, I think at IBM, we were big believers in the need to continuously authenticate. So, you know, there's a concept of risk-based authentication. And I think risk-based authentication is a very interesting concept because within a zero trust environment, we're talking about continuously authenticating, but doing that based on a level of risk. And so when it comes to risk or risk scoring, it's a matter of looking at what is the different sets of context that are available to us in order to assess the level of risk. And how can we establish a continuous process where we're taking in feeds from different sets of context and assessing the risk that happens. And there's no silver bullet where one of these sets of context can solve all your problems. It's really a matter of layering these sets of context together and looking at it more holistically. So I'm going to walk through the 5 main contexts that we're advocates of. And the first starts with the account itself, the user account attributes. If you're using a zero trust approach, you've done a good job of least privilege management, right? So the workforce, for example, you've done a good job of ensuring that employees only have access to the resource that they need to do their jobs and nothing else. So if they've joined and moved throughout the organization and acquired multiple entitlements, you've done a good job of proactively looking at your environment and removing unnecessary entitlements. So you've kept that attack surface low in order to reduce the amount of risk that's out there. But you have to have a thorough understanding of the user account and what they are supposed to have access to and what they're not supposed to have access to. And you start there. And the next step is to look at the device. So is the device itself managed or unmanaged? This is kind of an interesting one because with COVID, many of our customers said, yeah, well, we require our employees to use, a unified endpoint management solution to manage their devices. What they found, however, was that employees that were being forced to work from home were oftentimes coming in with unmanaged devices. And it was really kind of some of our customers were unprepared to deal with that, so we had to help them with what they could do to manage an unmanaged device, which some of our tools, since we also specialize in fraud mitigation, one of my other product areas, we have a very strong fraud engine that can look at devices and look at the ID and is it a known good device? Is it a known bad device? Is it the same device the employee has used to access information in the past, or a consumer for that matter? Where is that device connected, and so on? So looking at the account and then looking at the device are two good starting points. So the third area is to look at the activity of the user. So what is the user doing, and is that activity risky or not? Are they performing business as usual? Are they logging in the same time frames that they normally log in at, accessing the same files, or is this an anomalous situation where they're suddenly accessing new data that they normally don't in the middle of the night? That would be a higher risk situation. Also, if it's a consumer, you can look at things like just accessing their account balance, paying some bills, or are they trying to transfer a large sum of money to a new payee that they've set up? So that's the third set of context. Fourth is the environment itself. Where is the user coming in from? Is it a known good IP address or known bad IP addresses coming in from, from Russia or China, or is it coming in from their normal environment? Is the employee traveling, or are they coming in from the same device location that they normally have? And then the final area is probably the most interesting one, and that's looking at user behavior. And this is behavior of the user versus their normal baseline. Some of these devices, for example, have a wealth of information within the device about what the user is doing. If it's a phone, you can tell whether the user is holding the phone at the same height that they normally do, listening in to the phone from the same side of their face. Are they moving their mouse in a consistent way that they normally do? Is their keystroke pattern consistent with their normal keystroke pattern? And so you can really do some interesting things from a behavioral biometric standpoint to bring in additional context. So when it comes to risk-based authentication, the more enriched your set of contexts are, the better decisions you can make. So, wanted to give you a look at what this could look like from an administrative point of view. If we're a developer or an identity and access management administrator, we can set up adaptive access. Essentially what adaptive access is extensive risk-based authentication. Administrators don't tend to be experts at risk and understanding all the different factors of those contexts. That's where powerful machine learning can help with building out a risk score that makes it simple for an administrator to say, if this is a low risk situation for my user, I'm just going to let them in. If it's a medium risk based on the risk score, I want to go ahead and do a MFA when they log in. If they start doing something riskier throughout the session, maybe I want to do an additional MFA. And if it's a very high risk, I want to go ahead and block them. I don't want to have them have access. And that's why we call this adaptive access versus adaptive authentication, because the authentication is happening all the time in the background. And based on the level of risk, that authentication can end up resulting in just letting them in or blocking them or somewhere in between. So we don't have to, even though we have a zero trust environment and we're establishing zero trust best practices, we don't have to always burden the user with unnecessary hurdles to jump over. If we were doing MFA, requiring a second factor authentication every time an employee wanted to do something, that would make them less productive. If it was a consumer and we're making it difficult for the consumer to authenticate, they'll just leave and abandon the session altogether and go to another service. So If we want to have productive employees and we want to generate revenue and be competitive in the market, we can have zero trust by authenticating based on risk in the background and then only putting a hurdle in place when it's warranted. Wanted to show you what that might look like from an end user's perspective. So we have a user here, her name is Francine. There's some personally identifiable information we have about Francine, her email, her phone number, where she lives, what her electronic signature looks like. And then we can track the information about Francine in terms of what her behavioral profile looks like. Does her fingerprint match her fingerprint? Is she moving her mouse in a normal way? Is her typing speed consistent with what it normally is? What device is she coming in from, and what is her geographic location? So you're seeing some of those 5 contexts kind of come together in terms of helping us manage whether Francine's really Francine or not. So if Francine comes in and is just logging in and accessing a service, we can compare the real Francine against how we've analyzed her identity. And if everything's checking out in terms of her mouse speed and typing speed and device usage and all these other factors, let's just let Francine in and access the service. There's no reason why we even need to have her issue a password. Dave did a good job of describing the weaknesses of password and the fact that passwords are reused anyways. We've authenticated Francine as the real Francine, and we're going to let her in and do her job or consume her services. But let's say Francine's traveling now. She happens to be in the UK. One of the things we can look at in terms of accessing risk is did Francine log in from her normal location 5 minutes ago in San Francisco, and then now she's logging in from the UK? That would be an impossibility from a travel perspective, so risk would go through the roof. But let's assume that she actually is traveling into the UK. So all of her biometrics are matching her normal usage patterns. The only differences in her analyzed identity is that she's coming in from London, UK. So based on us analyzing her identity, we might ask her to issue her password, simple credential. Ideally, this is a single sign-on password that is used in a federated environment to access all of her applications. So it's something that's more secure and user-friendly. So that's the level we can assess in terms of authentication in a medium risk environment. Let's take a look at insider threat. Let's assume that Francine is logging in with her normal credentials, her normal geography, her normal device, but something's weird. The biometrics are off. She's moving her mouse at a different speed. She's typing at a different speed. Her online behavior is different. This could be a scenario where Francine was at her desk in her office and she stepped away, and maybe a malicious insider stepped up to her device and is doing some riskier things, and we detected that. It could be that her account was taken over entirely, right? And so it's a completely different actor that's done a remote attack, account takeover. And so this is definitely a high risk situation, and we're going to do an immediate MFA and hopefully block the fictitious Francine because they can't reply to that MFA request. And then the final scenario, which would represent the highest risk of all, would be a scenario where the analyzed identity shows that Francine is coming in from Moscow, from a known bad IP address, and also her biometrics are not meeting her normal patterns. And so we actually just want to deny access altogether. And that's the great thing about risk-based authentication, is that identity systems can be used as the remediation plane, right? We can either allow access, we can do multi-factor authentication, or we can suspend accounts and deny access to resources. So at IBM, we bring together risk-based authentication in terms of our smart identity platform, IBM Security Verify. The goal for us is to allow any type of user, a person, an API, or a thing to access any resource across the hybrid multi-cloud environment. The hybrid multi-cloud environment is the typical environment that our customers are in, where they have various private clouds, public clouds, SaaS applications, on-premise applications, and they would like a consistent approach. Why not have the same consistent approach for the workforce as is used with the consumers as well, instead of having silos of identity solutions that only deal with consumers or only deal with the workforce. And an ideal approach to your identity and access management platform is you look at identity governance for least privilege enforcement. You look at access management for authentication, and look at privileged access management in particular. I want to kind of give a shout out for the whole idea about privileged access management, because this represents one of the areas of potentially the most low-hanging fruit that we've seen in our dealing with our clients that are trying to move forward with Zero Trust. They might be doing a good job with their workforce and they have good enforcement for their consumers, but maybe they're still on spreadsheets or using homegrown tools for privileged account management. And this is one area where you can make a lot of progress and reduce a lot of risk by focusing on. So I wanted to leave you with kind of a chart that allows you to think about the roadmap to Zero Trust. Today we focused on users. We touched a little bit, Dave and I, on data and applications and the device and the network, but really Zero Trust is not there's no one vendor, no one product. It's a nice buzzword that if you go to industry events, everybody tries to say they're the Zero Trust player, but it's really more of a concept or an approach, and you need to look at users, data, application, device, and network, and you need to understand how far down the maturity curve are you. We talked a lot today about defining context. That's really the first step, is doing your identity governance and dealing with segregation of duty violations and enforcing least privilege. And are you able to discover and classify and encrypt all that data that's at rest and in movement? And do you know what your apps are and whether they're patched to the appropriate level, or your device, the same with your devices? And as you move down the maturity curve, you can begin to look at where are you in terms of verifying and enforcing based on this context. Are you able to manage access with single sign-on and privilege? Are you at a point where you can do risk-based authentication, and so on and so forth? And where are you in terms of, data activity monitoring and data loss prevention? And finally, in terms of resolving incidents, this really comes down to how sophisticated you are in terms of tying the telemetry of your identity and access management solution into the SOC, right? So can you open up a case for case management? Can you have integration with the SIM solution so that the telemetry of the user behavioral analytics is combined with other telemetry like network flow and others, so that you can have a more complete picture of the activity and you can set up the right steps for remediation. I want to give you a couple of links in the presentation, which we will have access for. If you'd like to learn more about adaptive access, we have a link there for a great look at risk-based authentication. If you need help on your journey towards Zero Trust, we have Zero Trust offering acceleration services from IBM. And I'll say that our professionals are very used to dealing with customers that have different vendors for different solutions. So don't think of IBM services as being only focused on IBM products. They're very good at helping you with a best of breed environment and what can you do next to improve your posture for Zero Trust and give you recommendations on products that can fill some of the gaps. And lastly, if you'd like to see more than just the screenshots of Francine in action, the best thing to do is to just sign up for our no charge application. We've made this available, especially during COVID, because of all the work from home scenarios where you can put adaptive access in effect for no charge up to 5 applications for an unlimited amount of time. So you can get started and figure out if this can help you with your journey to Zero Trust. And that's it for me. I'm ready for any questions you might have.
All right, thank you so much, Michael. Can I go to the audience? It says, for the IBM guy, so that's you. With privacy regulations in the EU, how are the sample profiles he presented addressed?
Right. So GDPR was really the first, and I think the California Consumer Protection Act is another. And from a governance perspective, of course, we're not collecting and storing any specific PII. So we're not at risk of tampering with or holding privacy information. More than that as well, when it comes to things like consumer identity and access management, we help our customers manage risk associated with being compliant with things like GDPR and CCPA. So, for example, giving the user the ability to opt in or opt out of communications for privacy and consent management associated with those IDs. And I would also say that one of the most promising areas, we didn't talk about it today, but we could talk about it on a future presentation, in terms of privacy for the identity space, is in the area of decentralized identity, which we're doing a lot of work with, leveraging our blockchain. Decentralized identity offers a reduced risk for all companies because you never hold the PI of any user. The blockchain has that. And so you're not at risk of holding PI or not removing that when a consumer or an employee requests for it. So there's various ways that we're on top of all of the different privacy regulations.
Okay, great. I have one more for you. When sifting through the noise of emails and other communications, how would you sift through it all to eliminate possible threat vectors?
Yeah, so I think this has to do with the questions really around phishing, right? And I know at IBM we get a lot of kind of internal tests where, as the first speaker was saying, that the bad guys will strike on a holiday weekend and they'll send an email that sounds like it's very urgent or sounds like it's very legitimate. And we try to get our employees to click on things just as an educational thing to educate them on what they could have done to avoid that. And a lot of it comes down to looking at the URL in the email and seeing if it's coming from an external source or not. Also flagging non-internal email as external. So when employees get the email, they see that it's not coming from an internal resource. So those are the kinds of things you can do to just continuously educate your employees, especially in the work from home environment now where the phishing attacks are going through the roof. Try to do some, not only internal education, but internal testing to see if your employees are falling for that or not.
All right, and if anyone needs more information or would like to contact you, can I drop your email address up in the chat panel?
Absolutely, please do. Be happy to hear from you.
All right, Michael, thank you again for joining us this morning. We hope to see you again soon, and if anyone else still has more questions, they can also continue to drop them in the chat panel while we move on to our next speaker. We have Benjamin Gilbert. He is the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Cybersecurity Administrator. Benjamin, take it away.
Thanks, Nancy. Good morning, everyone, or close to afternoon. My name is Ben Gilbert. I'm a cybersecurity advisor with the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. I know we don't have much time left, so I guess being the anchor of it, I'm going to try to get through this as quickly and with a bang as much as I can. So with that said, let me advance the next slides. There we go. Okay. So, as I mentioned, I am part of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. If you're not familiar with who we are essentially the newest agency in the federal government underneath the Department of Homeland Security. The president signed off on legislation, the CISA Act of 2018 back in November of 2018 that formed us as the nation's premier cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency. Our mission, quite simply, is to lead the national effort to understand and manage risk to our critical infrastructure. Simply said, but not simple to execute on, so anything but simple on that. Our motto there at the right-hand corner, defend today, secure tomorrow. So we're defending against the various threats that our country faces today while working with state and local government, private sector, and academia to help secure our critical infrastructure against the threats of tomorrow. So very diverse and wide mission space in that. So on to today's risk landscape. So at CISA, we're known as the nation's risk advisor. And as the nation's risk advisor, we can do more to advance the national risk management agenda than any other single place in the U.S. government right now. We take an all hazards approach to this, looking across the risk landscape to include areas such as insider threats, accidents or technical failures, systemic technical failures that can cause risk to our national security and public safety, risk to extreme weather, risk of pandemics such as the current COVID-19 pandemic we're in, and also risk to significant cyber attacks. Particularly with the current COVID-19 environment we're under, it's important to understand that critical infrastructure, whether with financial services, law enforcement, healthcare, retail, virtually any other industry sector out there, are right now at an increased risk of a cyber attack. Why is this? Well, during COVID-19, many of our critical infrastructure organizations have been forced to move much of their operations in an online working environment in order to maintain their operations. Doing so adds new technology and added complexity to the operating environment, which ultimately increases the attack surface. Threat actors know this. Moving operations toward a remote working operating environment also means that those organizations are now more reliant on that technology. Widespread disruptions due to this technology means a greater impact to operations. And with our IT personnel now mostly operating remotely, this also means potentially longer response times, which can increase operations. Threat actors know this. And if you're familiar with risk management, I know one of the previous presentations kind of touched on it earlier on. But what I basically described is the basic risk equation. Probability times impact equates to risk. So when both increase, such as in our current environment, so does risk. So with that said, I'm going to talk real briefly about some of the cyber threats specifically under COVID-19. But I'm going to, after this slide, I'll talk more, I'd say, deeply into broader cyber threats across really all industry segments. So specific to cyber threats under COVID-19, I'm only going to really touch on really one point here, and that is that we are right now seeing an increase in COVID and coronavirus-related cyber attacks, particularly with healthcare manufacturers and COVID-19 related research companies and companies that are working with vaccine and research for coronavirus. Specifically, FBI and CISA has recently released a joint public service announcement back in May that really announces, some of this particular threat with those healthcare segments and so forth. CISA also released a joint alert with the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre back in April, which really warns about advanced persistent threat actors, APT actors out there targeting our healthcare manufacturers and also targeting those research institutions that are researching drug treatment and vaccines for COVID-19. So it is worth noting that. I think many on the call today are aware of that, but just wanted to kind of put stomp that is out there. You can find those public service announcements and the joint alerts on our website at cisa.gov. more broadly on some of the risks that we face today out there today. And again, I think a lot of the folks in the audience know this, but it is again worth foot stomping. Cyber threats of today cause operational impacts. Just simply look at the latest threats of the various ransomware variants that are out there, specifically Revel, Soda, no Kibi. Though that particular variant is targeting managed service providers or cloud-based operating environments that are out there. Ryuk, another variant that's out there that's targeting state and local governments, as well as medical and education sectors and critical infrastructure organizations in those in the education and medical arena. Robinhood, Maze, Phobos, Crypto, VoidCrypt. There seems to be new ransomware variants that pop up, almost on a weekly basis. They are becoming more targeted to those specific organizations in those segments out there. So certainly worth pointing that out. There are malware variants that are out there that target operational technology and industrial control systems environments. Specifically, and as an example, Triton Hatware, Hatmin malware is a malware variant that out there that specifically targets safety instrumented systems. If you're not familiar with industrial control systems world, these are the systems that really control, thinking kind of, I'd say, think of, for instance, a nuclear power plant or an energy, a power plant of any sort. There are systems in there that are, for instance, program logical controllers. There are SCADA systems in different environments, different systems in those operating environments. Then there's safety instrument systems that are designed in a way that allows operations to fail or turn down in a very safe and methodical manner. Well, this particular malware variant is actually targeting those particular systems to create disruption and potentially, create a threat to public safety. So it is worth noting out there. Advanced persistent threats, obviously another key threat actor that's out there. There are threats that are targeting external dependencies, what we call external dependencies. So your vendors, your suppliers, your service providers. Revel, Soda, no Kibi ransomware variant is a good example of a threat that is targeting those external dependencies that are out there. These are organizations that are external to our organizations that we are reliant on being able to carry out our operations on a day-to-day basis. So, whether that be your, cloud-based operating environments, that could be, some of your vendors that directly support, some of your network appliances in-house and so forth. It's worth pointing that out that threat actors target those organizations. Emerging technologies is another great example of maybe an emerging, things like 5G technologies, autonomous vehicles, those emerging technologies that are, not out there yet, but are, soon to becoming mainstream. That just simply opens a greater attack surface for threat actors that are out there, creating new opportunities for those threat actors to create disruptions. So looking at, I'd say more specific strategies for reopening. I'm not going to go, elaborate much on this slide in interest of time, but just know that there are resources out there for organizations and reopening strategies for them and helping them assist with that. CISA recently published the latest version. We're on version 3.1 now on the guidance of essential critical infrastructure workforce. That's out there. That's available on our website at CISA.gov. CDC recently published a kind of a good one-pager flow chart, so to speak, on guidance for workplaces during COVID-19. This is a great flow chart that helps organizations understand key questions that they need to ask and really answer affirmatively to be able to start to reopen their operations. This right here is an example of some of those key questions. should you consider reopening at all, given the current environment? If there's government, state, local government restrictions in your region and so forth. If those restrictions have been lifted, great. What are some of the other questions? How prepared are you to be able to protect your employees who are at higher risk? So folks who have diabetes or heart conditions or so forth that are known to be at a higher risk of COVID-19 infections. How are you protecting those employees and so forth? So these are some questions organizations should be thinking about. Beyond that, more broadly speaking, talking about protective measures for various cyber threats that are out there. Now, again, I know most of the audience is probably quite familiar with this, but I can tell you time and time again, when we work with organizations and we're helping them coordinate various incident response efforts at the federal government level. We see this time and time again, that these basic cyber essentials, these basic things that I think everybody knows we should be doing, we just quite frankly are not doing in its entirety. So worth foot stomping again, having an inventory of all technology, an inventory of your technology and information assets. This includes prioritizing those assets so that you have an understanding of your high value assets in your organization. Prioritizing those according to the criticality of your operations. Deploying antivirus on servers and workstations. Again, I think everybody knows this, but we have seen it where there's those ones and twosies of workstations that maybe the one-off that aren't properly managed. To include having either outdated or no antivirus protection on them at all. This is particularly relevant in industrial control systems environments where you might not have the ability to adequately protect some of those systems. Turning on logging for all network appliances, servers, and services. When you're going through a cyber incident, you need to be able to conduct that forensics and open up an investigation and have that investigative aspect to it. And logging really helps understand the chain of events that occurred and where that initial attack vector is so that you can close that gap, so to speak. Backing up regularly using known, secure, and well-tested accessible solutions. Can't tell you again how many times we've worked with organizations and gone out and worked with those folks to learn that, yeah, they have a backup solution and it's in the next room on the same network and so forth, and their network's flat, not segmented, and so forth. So if they get hit by a ransomware attack, guess what's the first target, or going to be one of those first targets of that ransomware? It's going to be their backup system. So having known, secure, well-tested backup systems, really important to have in place before you can deal with a cyber incident. Implementation of good patch management practices. Find a good routine, a repeatable program that you can put in place to be able to implement patches and deploy patches in a very timely manner. And implementing strong user management best practices. Again, these are basic things I think every organization already should know. If not, these are one of those kind of low-hanging fruit things that every organization should be looking to do now if they aren't already doing it. Let's see here. More longer-term efforts. This is more, I'd say, when you're thinking about operational resilience, these are more longer-term measures that we should be putting in place. Having a plan for responding to cyber incidents. Many organizations, if they have a cyber incident response plan, it's probably outdated, hasn't been tested. So really important to have that plan in place well before an incident occurs. That way you know who you're reaching out to. Part of that incident response plan should be communications planning, who you need to be reaching out to for what and when for response efforts inside your organization and outside. That includes, media relations and so forth. What goes into responding and managing that incident as a whole. Developing, strengthening situational awareness, implementing innovative security awareness training. maybe sticking my foot in the mouth with this one, but I could tell you where the federal government, they have where our annual security awareness training, and I'll be honest, it is just a check the block, have you reviewed this or have you not? And if you're anything but an unseasoned seasoned security professional, it's not really going to help things other than just check the block for compliance aspects only. We really need to be going above and beyond that and informing not just our end users, but our C-suite folks, our technical folks, and developing training specific to those roles, innovative training that could help really orient them to the latest threats that are out there, and more importantly, what they need to be doing to respond, if they see something malicious or suspicious, and how they should be responding. Implementing good security architecture, utilizing cyber attack frameworks such as MITRE ATT&CK framework or Lockheed Martin's cyber kill chain. There's various frameworks that are out there. That's very helpful in being able to contain a incident during the incident response efforts of organizations. And then lastly, conducting internal audits, periodic assessments. Really important to conduct periodic assessments. Those help understand and identify gaps in your security practices and your security programs, so that then you can start to build a roadmap of how to start to close those gaps. Other things noting protective measures, from your top level leadership's perspective. Organizational leaders should be knowing their business risks and treating cyber as a business risk area. Foster a culture of operational resilience and cyber readiness. I'm not going to go through all of them here. One I'll probably focus on here. Build a network of trusted relationships to be responsible for developing. Build that net. Where am I? Okay, I'm jumping around here in my mind here. So building a network of trusted relationships with sector partners and government agencies. Really important to build those relationships before an incident occurs. The last thing you want to be doing when an incident occurs is trying to figure out who you need to be reaching out to and find out that they may not be resourced or staffed to be able to respond appropriately to your needs and so forth. So really important to be able to build those trusted relationships beforehand, before an incident occurs. And lastly, everybody in your organization should be participating in security awareness training. Everybody should know their backup options available and ensure locally stored data is backed up. And everybody should be vigilant, accountable, and report incidents and suspicious activity immediately to their security operations staff. So I know we're running short on time here. Just gonna run through this real quick. Not going to touch on a lot of this, but just know that at CISA we have a myriad of different no-cost cybersecurity services available to organizations that are looking to increase their cyber operations and their cybersecurity capabilities. This includes no-cost cybersecurity assessments, 9 different assessments, various training and awareness programs that are available. All this stuff is no cost. Various information products, one-pages that are out there. We do have a incident response capability at CISA, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Cybersecurity advisors, I am one of those cybersecurity advisors that are one of 24 cybersecurity advisors that are out there at CISA. Part of our operations is we have a regional presence across the country, and part of those regional operations, we have cybersecurity advisors. I'm one of those cybersecurity advisors. My role in particular is to work with public and private sector critical infrastructure organizations to ultimately help them strengthen and secure and build their cybersecurity capabilities and their cybersecurity posture. And we do so through reach back into all of these different service offerings that we provide. We also conduct assessments. We also provide advisory assistance and services to those organizations, and we can also provide incident response coordination efforts up to the federal government level and figure out the right folks to bring in to help that organization recover from that incident as soon as possible. Right down here at the bottom is kind of our 800 hotline, so to speak, if you need to report a cyber incident, or an email address. Certainly can go to our website here to find more information out about that. This is just a kind of a quick map and a layout of where cybersecurity advisors are laid out across the country. I'm the cybersecurity advisor. It's based out of Northern Virginia. I primarily cover West Virginia, and DC operations. My northern counterpart in Pennsylvania, he covers all of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. We also, and this is, I believe, a power hour for the Southeast. So we have 3 cybersecurity advisors based out of the Southeast, one in Charlotte, North Carolina, one out of Atlanta, and one out of, I believe, not Tallahassee, but somewhere around Tallahassee, Florida, somewhere in that area. Anyhow, so we have cybersecurity advisors all across the country. I would strongly encourage you to reach out to us, and I'll provide that an email at the end of this, so that you can reach out. I would strongly encourage you to reach out to your cybersecurity advisor, get to know them. They can walk you through various resources that we have available and so forth, and help your organization build capability in that regard. As I mentioned, we have multiple cybersecurity assessments available, 9 different cybersecurity assessments as a whole, ranging from various strategic, tactical, and technical levels. The cyber resilience review being the most strategic of them, looking across 10 different information security domains and really trying to assess your maturity and repeatability of various practices in those 10 different information security domains, basically ascertaining if you are or not doing these various practices and the repeatability of those practices. Helps you to understand gaps in your current process and your capabilities. All the way down to, we have, again, 8 other assessments, all the way down to the most technical, such as our remote pen testing or even our risk and vulnerability assessment, which is a full scope pen test. So we have a 1-week remote pen testing, and then the following week, we actually have a team that comes on site and conducts pen tests laterally throughout the network with that particular assessment. And then, the other assessments ranging in there. Again, these are all no-cost assessments. And if you're interested, please feel free to reach out to us on all of these. Lastly, just talk real quickly about the federal government's response in dealing with significant cyber incidents. So at the 105th level, at federal government level, there's primarily, I'd say, 2 lanes, if you will. We have a threat response lane and the asset response lane. FBI, through the Department of Justice, is primarily responsible for the threat response lane. So they are going after the perpetrator, opening up an investigation, treating that incident as a crime, and gathering forensics and attribution for the purpose of going after that perpetrator of the crime. CISA, through the Department of Homeland Security, is the primary responder for the asset response. So we work with that organization to help contain and respond and recover from that particular incident. So our focus is to help that organization recover as quickly as possible from that significant cyber incident. So when you're talking about things like ransomware, that's a great example of a threat that can completely debilitate operations and organizations. And so we can work with those organizations to help them recover, contain and recover from that incident as quickly as possible. Lastly, we have the intelligence arm there, the intelligence apparatus in the background, really bulking up or really supporting both legs of those operations, the threat response and asset response operations. In CISA, we have what we call CISA Central, which is really our premier cybersecurity center. Formerly used to be known as, I call this the artist, formerly known as the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, or the NCIC, so to speak. We used to be called, more recently called the CISA Integrated Operations Coordination Center, or CISA SIOC, so to speak. We are now formally known as the CISA Central. So if you have a cyber incident to report, you can certainly email us, CISA Central at CISA Service Desk at cisa.dhs.gov. You can call the 1-800 number at the bottom there, or 188 number, or you can even report that incident through our website there at the bottom. And then lastly, please come out and visit our website, learn more information about everything that I provided. I know this is a lot of information, a bit over on time here, but wanted to see if turn it back over to Nancy and to see if there are any last minute questions. And I see one here that says, were you aware that CISA is a registered trademark of ISACA? Yes, and we are aware of that as cybersecurity advisors. That's kind of almost a pet peeve for our organization. Certainly, I'm not the one who came up with the name CISA. But that said, we also like to say, security. We like security so much it's in our name twice. So enough of the poking fun at my own self here. I'll turn it back over to Nancy for any other questions.
All right, thanks so much, Benjamin. We still have well over 300 people still on, so thank you for that. One of the common questions we keep getting is, can we share your slides on our website after the event?
So yes, I'll share. I could share a version of the slides, certainly. Our internal affairs, honestly, they kind of shy away from that because, quite frankly, we're a new agency and we're still growing, and we keep adding things, almost every day. It seems like new services and new resources and so forth, and so we just want to be able to maintain the right messaging in that. But I will get a slide. I'll get a version of the slides out to Nancy. That was just
the contact us page is great, so you can get that.
Yes, absolutely.
Grab a few questions from the audience. If a company engages the CISA cybersecurity services, are there any of the results or conclusions available via Open Records Act to third parties?
No, that's a great question. So particularly with the assessments, and I didn't touch on this for time's sake, we do have a few different mechanisms in place to protect that information from public disclosure. Oftentimes we label these for official use only. We also have a protection mechanism called Protected Critical Infrastructure Information. It's basically a public disclosure protection mechanism that we use that essentially allows us, private sector and public sector as well, to voluntarily share critical infrastructure information with the federal government for homeland security use. And in return, we provide protections against FOIA, state local sunshine laws, civil litigation, and regulatory use. There are, I'd say, 4, maybe 5 of the 9 assessments that I listed there are pre-protected under PCII, but the others are protectable under PCII. You would just have to submit that to the program directly. But we do have different protective measures in place to prevent from public disclosure of those, because that is sensitive information. And we want to be able to build and establish trust with those organizations.
All right, understood. With cyber attacks occurring almost every day, how small or severe should a threat be in order to report it?
Great question. So yeah, multiple cyber attacks are a day, that we see a day in and day out. I mean, if you asked our U.S. CERT, it'd probably be in the number of thousands every day, to be frank with you, if not more than that. So basically any cyber incident that is impacting operations would strongly encourage organizations to report that out. If you don't report to us, report to the FBI's their lost of thought, their CyWatch is what they call it, as they frame it. They also have another cyber center as well. Report it to them, report it to us. Either way, we can certainly assist. We work with each other on the back end to help coordinate response efforts with those organizations. But if you are dealing with a cyber incident and it is impacting operations, absolutely report that. If not for looking for assistance, but report it for situational awareness and providing that common operational picture. A big part of our operations of what we do is to provide information sharing out there to different sectors and segments of various industries that are out there and industry partners. And we can't do that effectively unless we gather information back. We want to make sure it's bi-directional and so forth, and we have other services that could form partnerships and agreements with us to provide those information sharing opportunities. So really important to be able to report that, again, not just for response efforts, but for situational awareness aspect.
All right. Benjamin, I know you are busy, so we're really truly appreciate your time with us today and for letting everyone know about the services that are really within reach that many of us did not know about. So thank you again, and we hope that we see you at one of our live events next year.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And for everyone that's still with us, you will be receiving your CPE certificate within a few days, and the content that we're allowed to share, we will have that posted on our website, cybersummitusa.com. Next month, we will be hosting a virtual cybersecurity summit on July 28th at Tampa area. It is a free event, and you will receive CPE credits for attending as well. We'll have speakers from the DHS, FBI, and Secret Service discussing the latest security threats, and you'll be able to live chat and ask questions as well as speak with over 30 cyber solution providers. And you can register for that, again, on our website, cybersummitusa.com. I did have a few inquiries coming in regarding career opportunities in cybersecurity, so I wanted to let you know that we do also have another division which produces job fairs for security cleared and cybersecurity professionals. We have a virtual job fair coming up on July 23rd where you can actually video chat and interview with employers, and I'll post those details in the chat box. Our website there is techexpousa.com, and that's it for today. We hit you with a lot of information in a short amount of time. We hope to see you again soon. Take care and stay safe.
We created IoT Nation to help professionals like you navigate the IoT space, to find the companies, people, use cases, and events that are most relevant for you. On IoT Nation, you can browse over 25,000 IoT-related companies and dive into the details for specific ones. You can also search geographically, zoom into any area of the map, and explore companies in any city. You can find applications in various verticals, such as smart buildings, smart cities, connected mobility, and many more. And you can plan your week and month ahead by searching dozens of online and offline events to find the ones that are most relevant for you. For all Cyber Summit Power Hour attendees, we are offering free use of IoT Nation Pro for 30 days with the code CYBER2020V. If you have any questions, contact us at info@iotnation.com.